Welcome back to the Connected podcast. I'm thrilled to bring you an extraordinary collection in which some incredible students take the driver's seat and host dynamic conversations with professionals from across the higher education sector, discussing the vital topic of student belonging. I'm delighted to introduce Gem Standen again today, who is hosting a conversation with Samantha Wilson-Thain. Sam is an associate professor at the University of Warwick and is the director of student experience in the School of Life Sciences. Sam shares her experience with us and talks about networks that enable co-creation and the building of belonging.
Would you mind just giving us a very brief overview of your project you're going to be talking to us about today?
Yeah, sure. The project that I'm talking about are about our student networks within the School of Life Sciences, and they are sort of a sub-part of a bigger project around inclusive education. And talking about the student networks, it is important because it's probably our most active part of the project in terms of things that are happening and the kind of the positive outcomes. So yeah, we have four student networks that we created, and we have aligned those quite strategically, I guess, to our EDI committee structure and the task forces associated with that. And we did that because there was a real sort of lack of student voice in those task forces and that committee structure. And so alongside a sort of call from the students for this sort of network, or these sorts of networks, it felt that this was also kind of doubled up as a way to really boost student voice, particularly of kind of minoritized groups in that space, to make sure that students were taking part in the action coming out of those task forces. So initially the idea came from students. They were sort of saying, we'd really like, a life sciences Black student network, or we'd really like a student network for ethnicity. And when I arrived in October 2023, I sort of said, was there nothing like this before? And there had been networks and there had been groups, but they'd sort of fizzled out because there wasn't a strong leadership of those. It was sort of students in unpaid roles, giving their own time, and as you know, that those sorts of things sort of fizzle out. And so I think doing it this way round with our networks meant that we could take a better stab at it.
It's a refreshing approach, I must admit. I remember being involved in sort of student networks myself over the years, and there were points, I think, where it felt like too much work compared to my studies. So yeah, I completely agree with you. So I think you've touched upon this already with your really, really lovely introduction. Can you tell us a little bit more about the different student networks that you've been involved with, what they are and what they aim to do?
Sure. So the four that we have one for ethnicity, one called the SLS Disability Student Network, Gender Equality and Identity, and Community and Culture. And we named them like that because that mirrors the task forces of the department's EDI committee. But when we got together with the very first round of student network leads, we said, what do you think about these as names, as titles? And they thought that they fitted fine. That was probably the only part really that wasn't changed. Everything else kind of has molded, because as those networks have sort of evolved and grown, the priorities have changed. They've become more student focused effectively. So of course, setting these up, I had a very clear idea of what I thought they needed to achieve. But when we sort of sat down with the network leads and said, what do you think? What are the priorities here? There was a really strong sense that they wanted to improve the transition experience for students. And they were using their own lived experience of coming to university and that time to sort of focus that interest. And so that's what they started to work on. And in the first year, that was very much the focus. The aim sort of into the second year was more about how do we get more students into the networks and really benefiting from this space, and that it, in order to sort of boost belonging, how do we do that? And so a lot of the work this year has been around promotion and brand and logos, and who are we, and what's it feel like to be in the networks, and what do we want people to think about when they see the networks. So yeah, bit of a shift in focus, but I would say that the aim was always about belonging.
Yeah, and that's sort of intrinsically part of the sort of network / community approach that you're taking from the sounds of things. And ultimately, I think you really touched upon this in your introduction, in terms of like how the idea of these networks came about. I think you've just answered this in terms of how they're grouped around the themes, ethnicity, disability, gender identity and culture in relation to EDI. Do you feel that works well with the staff sort of level networks and EDI approaches that Warwick take?
I think so. Certainly from a department point of view, it's really because we're mirroring the same title. Well, I say the same titles, actually the staff networks were called race and ethnicity, and there was one called gender, just gender, actually, and they've recently changed their name to match the student network title, because that more effectively represented what they were doing in that particular group. And what it's meant is that we've now got the students from the networks leading those networks are sitting on those what were originally staff-led and staff-based groups, and those are feeding right back to the central sort of EDI committee. And so that sort of chain of feedback, or that loop of feedback and feed forward, is now there in a way that it wasn't there before.
Wonderful. I hope it's having the sort of impact that you desired. As a student, it can be kind of hard really to see or to feel seen, and to sort of have that full identity. So how do your networks help students feel that sense of belonging? Is it through the sort of full identity being seen, or do you feel it's more than that?
Good question. I think firstly, just having the space where they can come and be or bring their sort of authentic selves, whether that's virtually, in a gathering, or just contributing to something that the networks are prioritizing or working on, whether that's coming along to a craft and chat session, and the lead for the gender equality and identity network is there, and being able to approach them with things, a space where there are going to be people with shared values, and connecting with them. I think even just knowing that it's there, even if you aren't able to come along to every single thing that they put on, or be engaged in every single output or action, I think that's been really uplifting for students. For some students who were sort of outgoing when I was coming to the university and sort of saying those groups did exist but they fizzled out, I think there was a stronger sense that there was something kind of solid and longer term there that could survive. And I'll be honest, we've secured funding for this, so we are paying our network leads, and I know that's something that not all institutions will be able to do. We're in a really fortunate position in the current climate to be able to pay these students, but I think that's placed value on it as well. That's told the students that we value this work. We really care what you think, and we want to build this environment that will help you to belong, and we value it enough to be able to put some money towards it and pay you for your time in leading that. And I think that is really important.
Not necessarily just sort of seeing it as an extracurricular, but as a sort of vocational pathway as well for people that do want to progress. Brilliant. No, I think that's a really wonderful approach to have. Have you seen how being part of a network helps students feel more confident or connected at university, particularly for those that are taking maybe more of those leadership roles?
Yes, yeah, definitely. This year we've had one student carry through, so the rest had moved on. We're in sort of their final year when we did the first round of the first year of the networks, and we had one student stay on and lead one of the networks for us. And they have kind of really come out of their shell, grown in leaps and bounds in terms of confidence, are leading the way on lots of elements of the project. And one of the outgoing students actually wrote up a piece about kind of the impact of having that leadership role had on them in confidence. And I think what came through really strongly was that the value of the space, just being there and being able to turn up and be that, authentic and just bring themselves, and the feeling of being valued and being heard in that space as well. And for me, if that was all that the network's achieved, then I'm happy with that. That's a win for me. But if we can reach more students and help more students to feel that way, I think we'd be onto a winner.
Yeah, completely agree with you. It sounds really impactful. So what well, you mentioned about co-creations. How are students actually involved in shaping what the networks do or focus on?
Yeah, I mean, with the co-creation thing, it's there are definitely times when we need to take a consultative approach to things. We need to do this because, and we hope that everyone's happy with that. There are certainly times when we need to do that, but it was really important, if these were going to be student networks and student-led networks, and that they were going to last, stand the test of time, that we had to co-create with them. It couldn't be about setting some priorities and say, right, go and achieve this, because they just wouldn't have taken ownership and valued it in the way that they are. And so we've asked them, what should the priorities be? And rather than sort of lean into what the academics or the professional services staff think we should be working on, we've really just gone with what they think are the things we should be doing. An example of that is our student handbook that we created. We were sort of talking to them about widening participation criteria and how might we help students, and they actually said, well, we would like to create a handbook for incoming students to support their transitions. And we were sort of saying, okay, well, what sort of stuff would you like to focus on? And they had all the content because they were the ones living the experience, right? So they were coming up with some great stuff, and we were just sort of saying, okay, crack on, just let's make that happen. And they were watching them work together was really nice, and sort of leaning into the different strengths that they had as well. But guiding them, part of co-creation is to be there and sort of support the idea and do it with them, not for them. And I think to successfully co-create, you need to create an environment where there is trust, and the power dynamics are, they're always going to be there, but that they're addressed. And that you sort of hand over the reins a little bit, and I guess don't be too risk averse with things, but trust them. They are the experts in this experience.
Yeah, absolutely agree with you. What kind of changes have come out of the collaboration between students and the EDI task force? Or task forces, I should say.
Task forces. I don't know if I describe them as changes, but just certainly kind of the way I guess it's the way that the department, the staff are working with the students. There's we started out with sort of co-creating in the networks, but because now there is a stronger voice within those task forces, of course, there naturally is more co-creation within that space as well. The impact is that the student voice is stronger, and I think, like I said, that's a massive win for us. We are getting students therefore involved with various elements of the work that would ordinarily happen within an EDI committee and various task forces. They'll be working with us on things like the next Athena Swan application, race charter awards, and those sorts of things. So big kind of CV bankable things as well. So from an employability perspective, we are definitely making a difference to those students, I think.
Excellent. What does a supportive environment look like in practice, especially for students who might feel minoritized in their course or in their school faculty?
Like I said, that creating a space where there is trust and power is addressed, for sure. I think the way that I and others sort of connected to the networks tend to do it is turn up as our authentic selves.
Yeah.
And be vulnerable in when we need to be, and share experiences. I'd like to think that sort of by setting up that sort of environment, others feel that they're able to do the same. And that's certainly the feeling that you get when we meet with the networks and the members come along. But that sort of trust side is important. Can they trust that they can bring that problem, that issue, or that experience, that excitement, that thing that they're celebrating? Can they bring that to you and trust that they're going to be valued, heard, supported?
Yeah.
I think that's what we're trying to create here.
Sounds really important, isn't it?
Yeah, we set expectations as well. Expectation setting, I think, is really important. Certainly from the network leads, they are in paid roles, and so what are the expectations, and what do we want to get out of this? But of course, with the flexibility of this is a co-created thing, and so you're going to have to come up and generate some stuff. This is yours. It's your legacy to leave, I guess. And in the first year, that was something that the network leads really clung on to, was this notion of being able to leave something behind, because they were a lot of outgoing students, and they really sort of clung to that and liked the idea of being able to impact the next generation of students, which was lovely.
That is lovely, sort of leaving a legacy. That's great. So have the staff been actively involved in networks too? Is it more student and staff as separate entities? What kind of relationships or conversations have come from that?
We've got probably 4 key staff that have been part of the networks. So 2 academics and 1 member of professional services staff, and then myself as an academic. We've got Dr. Sophie Martucci, who's our Director of Academic Support, who has a really keen interest in widening participation, but also student wellbeing, and of course the wider sort of academic support side of things. Dr. Beatrice Lagunas, who is our co-lead of the EDI committee. And so a real kind of powerhouse in the EDI space for our department, and led much of the Athena Swan stuff. And then Janet Beard, who works with me in student experience and placements, and again, really sort of wide breadth of experience there in terms of supporting students, the events that we put on, and just keeping me on my toes, really, with have we thought about this and have we thought about that, but also keeping the students on their toes. So there's kind of been a core team, I would say, of 4 staff that have been involved with the networks to date. But I'd love to see that grow as we sort of move into the years to come. And then from the sort of the EDI task force side of things, there are typically 2 staff members on each of the staff EDI task forces that co-lead, and so they then are interacting with the network leads in those spaces as well. So it's quite wide-reaching, I would say.
It sounds really collaborative, and it's a really nice thing for students to see. I know myself as a student, I always like seeing where my school is collaborating with sort of other professional service careers, other teams within the university, but also talking to each other regardless of sort of our input as well. I do think that's quite an impactful approach. You mentioned about events and things like that. So what kind of events or activities have helped build the sort of community among students in their networks?
We've done all sorts of things. We've done kind of cake and craft type events,
they're my favourite.
Come and be and do and make something pretty.
And eat cake.
We've done some. We've done a breakfast club. We called it Breakfast Club, and the first one that we did, it totally flopped because we booked it before lectures at sort of 8 till 9 because they wanted a breakfast club. But of course, then very few people turned up because it was so early. So it then became sort of brunch club, lunch club, and that got a few more numbers, that sort of thing. And what we're trying to do is just bring the networks into other event spaces that we have. And so we do a sort of a refresher student experience fair in January time. The networks were there. Again, just, you know, capturing feedback, capturing ideas, promoting themselves, trying to encourage people to join. We've got an EDI festival next week, they'll be there. So a real variety, but what we seem to be moving towards is less about isolated events that are just the networks and more sort of integrated stuff across the whole place, really. But even to that extent, you know, we're not saying let's, you know, Sam comes up with the idea of sit down and have a coffee and make a bookmark, but we say to the students, what do you want to do? What's gonna be interesting? And everything from kind of therapy dogs to alpacas and ice cream vans and those sorts of things. Again, a luxury, you know, if you're in a position to have the funding and be able to do it. But there are lots of things that you can do really cheaply as well to bring people together. And often it's just, like I say, being in that space with others with the same values, wanting to work on the same things, in, you know, move in the same direction is enough. Yeah.
They sound like some fantastic events. A lot of my favourite things were just noted there. So yeah. Were there any challenges in getting students to engage? And how did you work around that?
Honestly, no. Honestly, no. For the network lead roles, we had a good number of applications. It seemed like people really wanted to sort of get stuck in and do that, you know, and the financial motivation is, of course, they're the paid roles. But also what we asked them to do was sort of submit a bit of an application. They then came and had a very quick interview. I call it an interview. It was more just a friendly chat, really, to hear more about what they wanted to see happen within those networks, if they were going to lead in that space, what they thought the priorities should be, that kind of thing. And some of it, I mean, they were just fantastic conversations. They were just amazing, and all the stuff you want to be going on in that space. So we had 4 lead roles, and I ended up recruiting 9 students, you know, that kind of doubled up in lots of places, and a couple of co-creators, because they were all just fantastic. So we took 9 of them in the end, and then this year we sort of set out with, okay, we won't go for 4, let's go for 9 again, because there's so much interest. So from the leadership point of view, wasn't hard to get engagement with that. The first year, getting people to join the networks felt tough, felt a bit of a slog, but I think it's because we didn't have an identity yet. It was very new. I guess it's like any club or society, you know, trying to drum up some interest, or business even trying to drum up interest in those first months or years can be tough. But September just gone, the numbers more than doubled in memberships, because we could push it. We knew what the networks were about. We had some priorities. We've been working on the handbook and things like that, so we could say more about it. So yeah, that was good. I think probably the biggest challenge is getting people to things at 8 o'clock in the morning, you know, a breakfast club, pitching it just right. And
yeah,
you're never going to please everyone, and I think that's something that the staff and students have learned in this work together, is we can put on the best event in the world, and it won't be right for everyone. So maybe we can just vary what we do and try and catch everyone at least once, or make something as accessible as we possibly can. So that I think that's where we need to lean into a little bit more in terms of including everyone.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head a bit earlier when you were sort of talking about more holistic approaches, that rather than having these sort of individualized network meetings, like having an umbrella event where it can encapsulate each of the different EDI areas, but isn't necessarily sort of honing in on one particular sort of demographic or area of EDI. So yeah, I mean, I personally, this is where we've run events in the past as well. We tend to take a whole student approach on that basis that, you know, ultimately, if you're a mature student and you have friends that aren't, you don't want to necessarily feel you can't go to those spaces. So how do you hope these networks are going to sort of continue to evolve or grow over time?
I think, well, the network's just finishing up on brand and logo stuff. So I'd really like to see that bit sort of launched and see what that does to membership. I think where we're at the moment, we have the networks sort of have collective goals and priorities. And as the networks grow, I do wonder whether they then might start to branch a little bit, you know, and have something focused around disability, or, you know, a specific disability event. Maybe we might move in that direction. But I think just thinking about all those students that have already joined, they've opted to join. You know, it's a voluntary thing. They've joined because they want to be in that space, and they feel like it's worthwhile being connected there somehow. And I think we just need to get as many students as possible into those networks so that we can be holding the conversations and sharing those lived experiences and get the most that we can out of it. I think more opportunities to capture those voices would be great. And really just get to know our cohorts a bit better and kind of share that more widely, definitely across the staff base. You know, this is who we've got, this is who's rocking up, these are the challenges we're facing, this is what we're celebrating at the moment, and look how diverse and wonderful we are, and all the strengths that we have. Hope that plays out in statistics and, you know, the measures that we're all measured by, but might not perhaps agree with how we're measured, but inevitably that is how we're measured. But let's just hope that all plays out in anything that says, do you feel like you belong?
No, yeah, completely agree with you. And just as a slight aside from that question as well, is this a university-led scheme, or do your student union have any involvement with the task forces that you've put together, the sort of networks that you run?
Yeah, no, they don't at the moment. So it is a department thing, and it's funded by a central department called for inclusive education. So that's who's sort of supporting it at the moment. I guess then you would call it sort of an academic network, or the equivalent of an academic society. We have BioSoc, which is an academic society as well. So no, not much, but we do connect. So for example, some of the network leads are also in various student societies, and kind of drawing on both their expertise, but also signposting at various events, trying to kind of get them involved. So not at the moment, but it's not outside of sort of scope of what might happen.
It may well be happening from the student side of things anyway, if they're, as you say, they're sort of interconnected with other SU related activities, or perhaps they're not drawn to SU activities, or for those who aren't drawn to the university activities, they're sort of going either or. So yeah, no, I think it will just add that sort of layer of choice and optionality and help them feel seen. So if a student is listening to this particular podcast and is unsure about joining a network, what would you want them to know?
That you'd be very welcome. To join, to come and see, to get involved.
There might be an alpaca.
Yeah, there could be a free ice cream. There could be an alpaca. No, I think, that we're so blessed with some great student network leads, and of course, as we move into the next academic year, those are likely to change. Some might roll over if they apply, but it's just a really great space, and I think that trust and friendship, support, and all of those things that I think when we ask the students incoming to the university at those very sort of first welcome talks, what do you want out of this experience? Friendship, support, I want to be heard, I'd like to be seen. That's what these networks do, and I think that anyone thinking about joining should come give it a go, and come and show us what strengths you have and can bring to this as well, because we can just continue to grow and grow and grow, and you'd be very welcome.
Oh, I want to join. So no, thank you ever so much. I wonder if there's anything else that we haven't covered through the questions that you wanted to draw the listeners' attention to before we close.
I don't think there's anything else to sort of to tell people about the networks, but if I could thank the network leads for all of their time and effort and hard work, that they're doing this alongside their academic studies, alongside raising families and jobs, and all sorts of other things. And yes, they're being paid, but it's a massive commitment, and they're doing so well, and there's so much good and positive outcome from these networks. So a massive shout out to them for leading the way and working together with SLS on this, and just creating a great, a better and more inclusive space for our students of the future.
Sam, thank you for your time today, and thank you for sharing your experience of running such a fantastic programme or project. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day.
Thank you, you too, Gemma.
Thank you for listening to the Connected podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please check out the rest of our extraordinary Voices of Belonging collection and stay connected.